Hey everyone, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to be talking about how many JIRA tickets should you complete each week as a software engineer, for career success so that you don't get pipped, so that you're not getting needs improvement reviews, etc., etc. And so over the past 7-ish years of my career, I've worked with and mentored dozens of engineers across various teams and orgs and companies, from formal mentoring them to just onboarding people to just having those lunch chats with people where you're kind of spilling the tea with each other and sharing what you really think about the company's policies. And a common pattern of stress and anxiety in newcomers to teams, orgs, whether they're junior earlier in their career or even just senior, and this is just a new org for them, is how do you measure your success? How do you measure that you're doing well compared to, the yardstick of success that this team, this org, this company has, because they're all kind of a little bit different. And so a lot of companies use JIRA for task management. This will also work for other task management tools. And the reason I'm kind of focusing in on JIRA though, and these task management tools, is because I often see these or hear about these kind of being used as a potential measure of impact and success in someone's career, often around task velocity or epic success, deadline things with burn downs and in your review cycle data and stuff like that. And so I think this is a relatively generalizable thing. And I've personally heard it come up many, many times. And just last week, I had a chat about it where this question came up. And basically, most of my posts on here are ways for me to crystallize my ideas around something and ways to share those more broadly. And so, I always think it's interesting because I feel like this question is more complicated to answer than it feels on the surface. And also, this is something that I've seen at least 10 times now that I've been posed with a similar question. And so here I just wanted to give my thoughts on it so that that knowledge is crystallized. I can just share this out to whoever asks me this next and give the most nuanced, thoughtful answer I can. And so by the end of this post, I'm going to try to answer how many JIRA tasks should you be doing each week as a software engineer, but we're going to have to take some detours along the way. So first, I think we need to start off with what is a JIRA ticket? Because I think this is crucial shared context to have to kind of come up with an answer to our core question. And at its core, a ticket is really just a to-do item, and here we'll just call that a task. So if you have a to-do list and you got a bunch of items, really a ticket is just one of those items. And yes, there are different philosophies around ticketing, and so what exactly this is will depend on your org or your team or the specific task itself. It might be a user story, it might be a problem to solve, it just might be a simple to-do item. It really depends. But at the end of the day, the reason we made a ticket is to remember that we need to do something. And so basically, it's a task on a to-do list. And now I think it's important to call this out and really define it, because we know that tasks vary widely in scope and impact, and thus the same applies to JIRA tickets. And so one task could take you longer than 100 other tasks, and one task could be more useful and impactful than 100 other tasks. And how many orgs and task management philosophies and systems have ways to try and measure and label these things, these different shapes of tasks, if you will, with things like points and priorities. But largely, these are just proxies for the underlying task. And so they're just going to have misalignment. Every proxy has its own version of misalignment. Some are better than others, but generally there will be some misalignment with these proxies. And so I think the key thing I want you to take away from this section is that each ticket is simply a task, and not all tasks are created equal. And generally, tasks and most things in life are on a power curve, and so there will be a few things that is far more important than basically the rest of them. Okay, so what does this task definition mean for you and your career as a software engineer? Well, we kind of need to break down what success means in your career as a software engineer to see how we can leverage this task definition in order to achieve this success. And in general, there are usually two perspectives, often a few more, but two primary perspectives, I would say, that have an outsized impact on your career at least within a company. And the first one is really like the business perspective. And, from the business perspective, they're trying to hit their quarter goals and they enlist task trackers to try and observe progress. And, this is the perspective of why you were hired in the first place, because they wanted to hit more of their goals and they figured they needed more people. And so the whole reason you're at this company is because the business thought you were useful. And now generally the business actually doesn't care about tasks. They really just care about outcomes. So are their problems and their goals being achieved on time as they expect? That's really all they care about. That's why they hired you. That's kind of what matters to them. But there's also this secondary perspective that's really important. I think this trips up a lot of people, especially earlier in their career. And it's basically, what you are trying to do as someone who's working as a software engineer is you're trying to do good work probably and progress in your career, whatever this means for you. This might be growing titles. This might just be making more money. This might be like gaining prestige or just, having a vocation or something to do that makes money. A lot of different goals that you might have, but generally you want to be successful in your career, or at least just not get pipped or something. And now generally those rating you, the systems, the people that are rating you in your career and your career progress, like when you're up for promotion and stuff, these people do care about these tasks as a proxy usually for effort and misguidedly impact. Now, ideally, both of these perspectives would align because logically they both should want the same thing, success of the business. Thus, logically, the better you help the business succeed, the more valuable you are, and thus the more you should be rewarded and progress in your career. Now, anecdotally, that is often not the case. There are misalignments and incentive structures, and the soul of the idea, which is helping the business succeed, often gets lost in the layers of management telephone, aka the game of telephone, where each layer of indirection leads to the message changing a little bit. And so usually after, let's say, 5 or 6 layers, it gets lost totally. I would also say that incentive misalignment is the bane of large companies. This is why I think large companies start off pretty well, and then usually some different leadership comes in with different visions, and then the incentive structures get misaligned, and then we just start politicking all over the place. But I digress. What this means for us as individual software engineers trying not to get pipped is that we often need to manage our own careers and frame our accomplishments to fit the definitions of success of both of these perspectives if we want to progress. And at the end of the day, it's unlikely anyone else is going to do this for you. And so yes, this does fall on you, even though it seems like, the org would also want to make sure this is working correctly. Largely, this is just not the case. All right, so let's start from succeeding from the perspective of the business. So the business perspective is often the most logically aligned with incentives. This is because our whole job is to fulfill a role that the business needs to succeed, and thus it makes sense that our efforts would always be aligned towards that success. Now, generally, the business cares about moving their KPIs, hitting their quarter goals, and meeting intermediate deadlines. This is often set from top-level initiatives, and teams have varying degrees of freedom for how they try to fulfill those goals. But largely, if the goals are fulfilled, that's all that matters. And so for the most part, this means that the business does not care how you manage tasks. Yes, they want to have a high-level view on if things are going well or not. And, if they're not and the timelines are going to be messed up, they want to know how they can fix it. But generally, they don't really care about the size of your epics or the velocity of your tasks or the PRs or how many lines of code you're shipping. They just don't care about that stuff. The business just wants to make sure that their numbers are moving in the right direction, their initiatives are on track, and their deadlines are being met. And so this means that they do not care if you spent 1 hour versus 100 hours on the problem, or if you finished one task versus 100 tasks to get it done. They just want their asks completed. And more generally, this means that they care about the impact, the outcome of the work, not the intermediate outputs or effort put into it. They just care about the impact and the outcome. And so my advice to succeed from this perspective is really to just focus on the org and team goals. These are the main things, and this is the definition of impact. And I think if you just focus on impact and making sure those things that actually matter from the root of the value chain, that is probably the best North Star and proxy you can have for directing where should your effort be going. The next thing to do is to manage expectations early and often. So when other things inevitably pop up, like bugs or a new ask from a team that they didn't get it in your quarter plan, and now they're like, oh my gosh, we're shipping in 2 weeks and we thought y'all were going to have done this, but you never told us about that. You need to really discuss priorities with stakeholders and drop the things that are not priorities. And I think this is crucial. I see a lot of people in their career who work very hard but get very little reward for this. And it's often because the way that they try to scale themselves is through more effort, but really that's just not sustainable. You want to scale yourself through better prioritization. And I call these people heroes. Like, they are doing heroic efforts, but like a good hero, they never get rewarded for it. And we don't want heroes. That's a quick way to burn out. We like you, like, don't hurt yourself doing this. It's not worth it. So instead, you just need to prioritize. When these things pop up, just talk with everyone and find a compromise of like, look, this new thing's up. I can't do all 3 of these things. Which one is more important to everybody? And you align on what we all decide, and that's what you go with. And I think this is so important because you will not get credit for the extra stuff if you have not done the work to align priorities and make sure everyone's on the same page. And often what it ends up doing is this random ask, you're like, oh, it's small. I'm just going to go knock it out in a week. And it's not going to be a week. There's going to be new bugs. It's going to introduce a security issue. Like, it's going to take a lot of your effort and focus away from the main things. And so largely, you're not going to get credit for it. And actually, it's often going to cause you to miss your main priorities or do worse on them. And so this will be seen as a negative. And so you're going to get penalized for doing more work. Don't do that. It's bad for everyone. It's bad for the business. It's bad for you and your morale. It's bad for the team we tried to help. Like, no heroes. Don't be a hero. Okay, and finally, make your accomplishments visible. So the business will not understand or care about low-level details, nor will they take extra effort to understand how what you've done impacts them. And so they don't care how hard this bug was. They don't care how like ingenious your algorithm is. They're not going to know that you changing this little thing that makes this thing 10x faster is going to save them like $100,000 over the next year. They don't know that. They're not going to do the work to do that and find out. And so therefore, you're not going to get credit for it because nobody knows what this thing means. And so it's up to you to make your accomplishments visible and frame them in a way that they understand, usually using language like the KPIs they care about, the goals that they have for the quarter, and business or customer unlocks, ideally ones that they actually care about and that they prioritize. And so you should be sharing your accomplishments broadly when you do this, and put it in language the whole business will understand, and often just like make it short because nobody has time to read like a 10-page essay on like how this is useful. Just a paragraph is fine, probably with a title and a TLDR. All right, so that's the business side. Now we need to talk about succeeding from the perspective of your career. Now, whatever your goals for your career, generally you want to get good plus ratings in your current role, so at least you don't get like fired, you know? Some people want a ladder climb, some people would just want to chill. But generally, you don't want to be in your role and get fired because you got to find a new job every like year. That's annoying. So it would be nice if just succeeding from the business perspective were enough, but unfortunately, it largely isn't in most places. And this is for a lot of reasons, but like largely it's because most orgs, teams, companies do not have visibility into impact, which is fascinating because it's like the only thing that really matters. Also, HR, leadership, management, there's a quest for holistic, comparable measurement for easier ratings. And in theory, this is nice, but in practice, very, very hard. This is like the SAT, ACT, like, is it correlationally correct? Yes. Is it objectively correct? Probably not. But we do need to rate people every 6 months, so we need a way to try and make this reasonably meritocratic. So, like, how do we do this? And largely, this ends up just using the measurements that we do have, which is usually outputs from whatever process we have in place. And so what this means is that orgs often resort to using proxy measures from these process tools, like JIRA, like GitHub, like maybe attendance data in an office, like how long are you online with Microsoft Teams or Slack. These are proxy measures from process to try and measure outputs as a proxy for outcomes and impact. And they do this to try and make these data-driven decisions, which, yes, often overemphasizes outputs versus outcomes because the only thing that they're measuring is outputs and there is no correlation. Well, maybe some correlation, but there is no causation of outcomes. And so this often is like tasks or points completed in a quarter or a half, or lines of code, number of PRs and number of comments, or weeks of work completed based on whatever your estimates were, quarter line items completed, days coming into the office, all sorts of measures like this. And this may seem ridiculous, but like if you've been at a few orgs in your career, you've probably seen this before. And the amount that it influences the reviews depends, obviously, from org to org, but like I guarantee you ask someone who's been in at least 3 orgs, they've seen this happen. Now, often these aren't enough, and so they're often accompanied by and colored with cherry-picked situational anecdotes that your reviewers happened to be a part of. They happen to be a witness to this thing happen. And this is, I would say, largely what ends up in your peer reviews and up-down reviews is these snapshots of time about something. And so it might be leading a meeting very well or very poorly. It might be finding or solving a particularly hard bug, or it might be like taking initiative to do X that nobody else wanted, or failing to do so, and in the extreme case, taking initiative for X and then failing to actually complete it, which turns a positive into a negative. And all of these often come regardless of the resulting impact or context, with the general goal, or I wouldn't say goal, but the general like direction vector of these things. What they're trying to answer, because they don't have data, is giving this like qualitative color, I would say, I guess, to this feedback and to this review, to try and make it feel holistic, because really we only have a very few one-dimensional data points to kind of work off in most cases if we don't have that impact dimension. And generally what they're trying to answer is these three things. One, are they a dependable teammate? AKA, are they like a solid worker? Do they reasonably get stuff done? Two is, are they working hard? I wish this wasn't the case, but when we're in an output-focused review cycle, it matters about outputs and effort often, even though that often has like very little correlation with outcomes. That's just how it is. And are they doing good work? And so this one's often a little bit closer, I would say, to maybe quantitative, because it's like, is the code reasonably decent? Are you hitting deadlines? Stuff like this. But a lot of this is just kind of based on these anecdotes. And so together, this paints a general picture of how you're viewed career-wise and is largely what ends up in your peer and up-down reviews. The problem, of course, is that each one of these proxy measures is itself flawed, and while sometimes taking a mean of many proxies can lead to a greater understanding of the whole, I think more often than not, bad data leads to bad decisions. But this is the reality of how these things work, and so you kind of got to play within the bounds of this game. That said, I think there are ways to play the game so that you largely get to focus on what matters, which is the business impact, the outcomes, if you will, and avoid the politics and still achieve positive outcomes for yourself and your career. And so my advice for succeeding from this perspective really is, one, to observe the team and org norms and fit into that. So this might mean task size, task velocity, what is rewarded often in like, is jumping on the bug and fixing it rewarded? Is it like ways that you organize your PRs? Is it ways you organize your epics, stuff like that? What do they consider best practice, and how they track and share progress? Especially when you're first joining a team, just like try to understand the norms and fit into that before you try to change them. This will go a long way to making sure everyone's speaking the same language, and so you can at least be measured semi-relative to how everyone else is being measured. The next one is to always show progress, and this means like always completing some tasks each week. And if this means you need to like break bigger tasks down into smaller ones, then do that. And I would also say a lot of times when people are not doing this, it's because they are doing that invisible work, which we talked about earlier. And invisible work is bad because you're just not getting any recognition for the work you're putting in. And so as much as it sucks, like, and ideally people could just trust that you're doing the work, that's just not how it works. And so you should just always be tracking this work you're doing, even if it's like a random thing or whatever, just to show people that you're actually doing this stuff. Next is to work with your manager. So at the end of the day, your manager is your most direct connection to the review cycle. They're going to be the primary filter for your ratings, whether they put you up for promotion, what the packet's going to look like, how they're going to actually present to you in these promotion meetings. And they're going to have the most perspective on like what success looks like from the org and how you are both matching up to that, but also measuring against your peers. And so you should really be working with your manager to see how you are doing and make plans to do better with them. That's probably the best feedback and source of truth you're going to have throughout this whole process. All right. So how many JIRA tickets should you be completing each week as a software engineer? So now we kind of have an idea of what these JIRA tickets mean and what success often looks like from a few of the important perspectives that factor into your career success, though these can and will differ from org to org and what exactly they're looking for and stuff like that. So pay attention to that. But now let's try to answer that original question of how many tickets should you be completing each week? And so from our two primary perspectives, the general answer is, from the business, they really just care about solutions to their problems, not how you do it. And so they don't care about tickets. They really just don't. But from the careers perspective, they often do care about tickets because those are easily measurable and they just don't have access to a better measure. Some companies are better at this than not if they are focused on impact. But I will say most companies, most orgs, most teams have some substantial percent of their ratings based on outputs instead. And so in these cases, tickets do matter, and probably I would say in most places, tickets do matter some percent. And so here's my simple scalable system for trying to manage these perspectives in a way that kind of gets away from the politics and just lets you do the best work you can. So the first thing is to focus on impact. This is my best advice for any engineer and probably any role and whatever you're doing. This is like the only thing that really matters. But your mileage may vary depending on the role, so take it with a grain of salt. And at the end of the day, you were hired into this role to help the business. And so the North Star is to make the business succeed by accomplishing your org and team goals. Everything else really is secondary. And now short term, this may negatively impact you because misaligned incentives exist. But long term, this is better overall for your team and your org, for your career at the company, because these things will compound even though you might not get a good rating for them in the half that you did it. And for your overall career in terms of resume builders, because nobody cares how many tasks you did in a given half. What they care about is what you actually accomplished from the business. And so in your next interview, they don't care that you did 1,000 tasks. They want to know, what did you accomplish? How much money did you make? How much money did you save? What cool thing did you build? That's what matters. So just focus on these things. It's better long term. Now, short term, you may have bad teams, orgs, and leaders that do not see it this way, but largely they will get moved out. It just might take a few halves. And sometimes they just get promoted to their level of incompetence. And in those cases, just move yourself to a different org because they're going to be toxic for everyone around them. But yeah, there really is no way to avoid them short term. Like, these misaligned incentives do exist. But long term, if you do focus on impact, this is what matters and will get you the best returns over your career. All right. The second one is to make visible progress. And so really all you can do is your best. And what most people are caring about is, are you being a dependable worker who is making progress on their priorities? That said, you will need to make sure that you are making this progress visible. And visible work does not get rewarded and often gets penalized. Again, we do not want heroes. We just want dependable people making progress and letting us know that, if they're on track or not. And so really what you should be doing is track the work that you're doing, make it visible through like tickets or PRDs or RFCs or chats or whatever your org uses to manage this stuff and communicate it. Just do those things and publicize when milestones are achieved. Send out messages to your stakeholders, update your Epic tickets or Gantt charts or whatever those people are using. Send out a company announcement if it's big enough, or at least send it out to, the broader channel that is related to the thing you built, and log it on your self-eval sheet so that you can, bring it up in your next review cycle and make sure you get credit for that thing. Because again, if you don't do this, if you do not make your progress visible, then it will just be invisible and you'll just get no credit for it. And finally, just get regular feedback. So check in with your manager, your stakeholders, and your project collaborators regularly on your priorities, plans, and anything that could go better. Long term, this is how you grow as an engineer. And short term, this can help you course correct before your next review cycle. So but change your actions so that you can fix whatever happened. And largely because these are the people that are going to be writing your reviews, this is largely the feedback that matters most. And so even if you start off with in a bad way, you did some bad meetings, you failed a project or something early on in a half, if you're regularly working with them to fix it and you end up fixing the problems that they are bringing up and solving for them, people are going to look good on you. They're like, they made a mistake, but they solved for it. And so this can basically fix a lot of those anecdotal snapshot issues that might end up in your review and turn them from a negative to a positive. So in practice, this means you should be completing probably at least one ticket each week, and often closer to 3 to 5. This measure, of course, is largely useless because context matters. So really it matters more that you're doing a reasonable amount of tickets or work or however they're tracking it compared to your peers, because all measures are relative in the end. And that said, if you're not at least doing this much, near the relative average, then that's a sign you should think about why. And maybe you aren't following the best practice, you aren't splitting up the tickets enough, or maybe you're just framing your work inefficiently, or maybe you're just doing a bad job. If you're getting nothing done for a week or two, you should really think about that. Maybe you do need to work on yourself. But yeah, largely it depends. So those are my thoughts on JIRA ticketing and more broadly framing the work you're doing so that you actually get credit for them from the business and career perspectives. Now, take all of this with a huge grain of salt, though, as your mileage may vary. It's really different from org to org and team to team. And sharing these tactics directly may get you in more trouble than they help you. People don't like it when rules of the game are shared directly and literally. They like to often put a nice spin on it, but use your own discretion and judgment for how you want to share this stuff. And now, more caveats, like this is all really just my personal experience. I'm not good at politicking ladder climbing. I've only been at a few companies and teams. So this might not be universally acceptable. I have a deficit of decorum. When I see something that I don't like, I just say it. And so that often gets penalized for me. And my views often get me in trouble when my logic doesn't match with cultural norms. Career progress is one of those big ones that I think is just a ball of subjectivity. And so I often get in trouble for these kinds of things. This is how I view things, how I've tried to kind of like balance my craft with its career, and how I've gotten where I am today. So hopefully it's more helpful to you than not. Now, a question for you is, how do you think about being successful in corporate environments, and what are some tactics that you use to be successful at your job and in your career? That'd be helpful to know, because obviously I haven't gotten all figured it out either. If you like this post, you might also like 3 tips to be an effective software engineer with less work and more fun. My best tips that I give to most software engineers. Might also be interested in my career as a software engineer so far, or maybe my simple daily to-do list as a software engineer, how to maximize productivity and minimize waste. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.